All right. Our speaker today will be Jorge. He is a postdoctoral fellow at the Geophysical Inversion Group at UBC. His background is in near-surface geophysics using machine learning, and his current research is focused on using neural networks to classify UXO from EM data. He did a joint PhD program at Ghent University and University of Liège using deep generative models to develop images. So with that, I will pass it on to him to do something.
All right. Thanks, Russ. Thanks, Don. Thanks, BCGS, for letting me give this talk today. Yeah, I've been working on. We've been working in this work in this project for the last year on developing convolutional neural networks to classify unexploded ordnance directly from multi-component electromagnetic induction data. This is a project that we have been working also with Black Tusk Geophysics, and it was supported by a Department of Defense of the U.S. assertive project. So I'll start by talking a little bit about the basic setup of using time domain EM to detect and classify UXOs. So the basic setup, you have this transmitter here, where you have an electrical current running through it, and you suddenly shut that current off, and that induces a dipole moment in this UXO. And this UXO is usually a highly conductive, highly permeable object. So basically, the electromagnetic decay are related, the dipole moment decays in time, and the associated secondary magnetic field due to that dipole moment is recorded in this second receiver here. So in general, we use this forward model where we require the position relative to the transmitter, the position of the UXO relative to the transmitter and the receiver. We also require the orientation of the receiver, because we will be simulating the UXO considering like three principal axes, and each of these principal axes is associated with different dimensions of this metallic object. So basically, if you have this object here, the UXO is axially symmetric. So we have this long axis here, which will have an associated electromagnetic decay, which is here parameterized as a polarizability. So L here is just what we call polarizability, and it's time dependent. So this L1 will be associated with this larger dimension, and will basically decay slower in time compared to the other two transverse directions of the UXO. So being axially symmetric, this L2 and L3 are basically the same. So we expect those two curves to be overlapping. And any other metallic object that doesn't have this symmetry we won't have these two L2 and L3 overlapping. So this is basically we exploit this fact in order to classify different kinds of UXO and different kinds of metallic objects. So the way this is usually done is the traditional approach will be to use inversion to get each of these parameters. So the position of the UXO, its orientation, and finally its polarizability. So this is a polarizability. This is usually referred to as a polarizability matrix or polarizability tensor. And we require 3 parameters here in order to plot these polarizability curves. And we will be only using the information related to the polarizability curves to make the classification of this UXO. So the kind of systems that are used the modern systems that are used to classify these UXOs are time domain systems, and they usually have several transmitters and several receivers. And this is just basically because if you take a look from the last slide, you require the coupling between your transmitter and your UXO has to be from different angles in order to recover this full polarizability characteristics of the UXO. So this is a marine system, so it will go under the water and will be used to detect UXO that is laying at the bottom of the sea. and it hovers like like 1 meter above the sea bottom and just being towed by this ship here. And the transmitters are just these yellow loops that are shown here. And each of these black boxes is a 3-component receiver. So you can see there's a lot of signals trying to illuminate these UXO from different angles. And a couple of challenges in comparison with terrestrial data is that we don't have the access of a GPS directly there. So it's a little bit more of uncertainty in the location accuracy. And we also have this, the seawater and the sediments have a very large response, electromagnetic response. So we usually have to remove that response in order to classify the UXOs based on electromagnetic data. So a little bit more on details on the traditional approach is you start with this, what is called a digital geophysical map. It's just basically the amplitude of one of the, you can choose any of the different combinations. You can choose, for example, only plot the C component for each of the receivers. And you can compute some average between the different transmitters. And you will end up with a map that looks like this. They usually call it like a heat map because you can easily pick, you can see these UXOs are popping up like a dipole signals in the data. And then after that, they isolate each of these anomalies. And this is what they call target picking. So once they isolate this anomaly, they simply estimate the polarizability curves. And they run some quality control, and basically they have this very large UXO library available. So they kind of set a lot of these UXO objects and in controlled conditions and measure the induction from different angles. So they already have this very large UXO library. So once they recover these polarizabilities from inversion, they simply look at this library and try to match to the closest available curves in this library. So that's how it's basically classified. And you can classify the type of UXO, or you can simply tell it's a UXO or it's not a UXO. So, but we tried a different approach where we didn't require this inversion step. So we were thinking about using directly convolutional neural networks, apply directly on the electromagnetic data. So a couple of nice things about this trying to tackle this problem with CNNs or convolutional neural networks is that there's the availability of this library of ordnance objects with polarization. So that means that we are able to, we'll be able to generate a large training data set, which is usually, which is needed for this kind of machine learning methods. You need a very large training data set in order for your CNN to perform this classification. And we also have access to a lot of, labeled field data sets. So they know which kind of, they seed objects. So you have these test sites where they seed objects and they know which kind of objects they have seeded and where they are located. So this is basically, we're not training directly on field data, but this helps us a lot to validate that our method is actually able to distinguish between different kinds of UXO. And basically, why CNNs and why not other machine learning method? It's just basically, they're very useful in terms of trying to look at the spatial and temporal features in the data. And since we are expecting this very dense data set that is acquired by these multi-component systems, we expect, of course, to be some correlation in space, in two spatial dimensions, and also in time, because we're recording time domain EM. So this is what a convolution looks like. So basically, you're trying to exploit this correlation that you expect in your data. And going a little bit more in detail about the CNNs, they're just basically this composition of functions where we require that the input is we pass a filter through the input and we generate intermediate representations. So y1 and y2 here will be the intermediate representations. And finally, we'll get an output S. And this can be simply, mathematically, is just simply we're applying matrix multiplication, which is given here by the K. And this is followed by what is referred to as element-wise nonlinear activation function. So the sigma here is simply taking a nonlinear function on each of the outputs that were generated by this matrix multiplication. As if you're considering like the deep learning approach, you will be not only using one layer, so not only one single matrix multiplication followed by a nonlinear function, but several of these operations. In summary, you can write that the neural network would be called this function f here, and it's taking the input x, and all the parameters of the neural network will be contained in this theta vector. Key aspects is that it's translation equivariant. So that just means that by having these filters, it doesn't really matter where we have certain patterns. Your input, for example, here could be an image. So if you have the same pattern in the image repeated at some corner of the image or in the middle part, so that's what that will change the output in a similar way. So that's what means translation equivariant. We also have that deeper networks allow more complicated functions. So if we use many layers, we'll be able to represent more complicated functions. In this case, for example, that we're trying to take directly the electromagnetic data and output some classification map. So we expect that kind of mapping to be somewhat complicated. So we require not a single layer, but a few of these layers. And finally, all operations that are being performed here are differentiable. And this is a key aspect and why neural networks are used for a lot of things, because we can easily get the derivatives, and we can train the neural networks using some sort of gradient-based approach. Okay, so this is a typical example of what a neural network is used for. So this is a supervised classification problem where we're provided with labels and data, and construct a function will be a network that outputs labels given some input data. So for example, here we have the image of a horse, where in reality this has the three RGB channels. So it will have a certain width, a certain height, and 3 RGB channels. So that will be our input X here. And what we're trying to do is just basically the neural network will generate something that looks like this. So it's just, in this case, we're not only trying to give a single label to each of these images. So we're not only interested in telling, the neural network telling us, this is a picture of a horse. We also want it to actually label each of the pixels within the image and say, this pixel corresponds to a horse. So this is called image segmentation. And just basically, we need a lot of input-output pairs. So this horse and this segmentation here will be one output-input pair. But we need tens of thousands of these examples in order for the neural network to learn how to perform this image segmentation. So once it's trained, it will take an input that looks like this, and will output an image segmentation or a labeling that looks like the one here shown as predicted. So again, this neural network is just basically mathematically shown like this. And I just wanted to draw your attention to this last layer. Just basically taking the S output here of the neural network and transforming into probabilities. And this is just using a function that is called softmax. And this is basically to translate this last layer to probabilities. It's just a common function. And the nice thing to notice here is that it's also differentiable. So the neural network is able to also, we can train our neural network because we can compute its gradients and perform gradient descent. And training neural network is just basically very similar to what you have for geophysical inversion. So we have to define an optimization problem, and we have to estimate the parameters of the network. So again, all the parameters here are given by this theta, and just basically each of these kernels or filters that I showed you before. And also we have this, what is called the bias terms, which is another parameter that is added to the output of after performing this matrix multiplication. So all the parameters are estimated using gradient descent, and also similar to what we have in geophysics, we need to define an objective function or a loss function, in this case, to actually compare each of the pixels and tell the network, okay, you're not making the right classification for this pixel. We use this cross entropy loss. So Q here is just basically the probability of a certain pixel of being classified in a certain label, and P in this case will be given by this by the truth segmentation, and we simply give a probability of 1 to each of the pixels that correspond to the horse in this case. So we minimize that, and once that's how we train the neural network. Okay, so that's the general setting for CNNs when we're considering images as our input to a neural network. But for a case of electromagnetic data, multi-component electromagnetic data is not so straightforward, right? Because the data set that we acquire with these systems is kind of a little bit more complicated. So this is just the setup, the layout of the system that I showed you before, the UltraTEMA 4. And this will be towed behind the ship, and this will be like the moving direction. And they usually refer to this distance, the along track distance, just basically the distance along the moving direction. And the cross track distance is just the perpendicular distance to that. So here on the right, I'm just showing a small box where we have each of the transmitters is firing, and the recording at the lower part of the image is just from one of the first receiver that I'm showing at the top. So, and I'm showing a fixed spatial window here at the bottom. So it's around 3 meters. And yeah, so if we start, the way it works, this system works is they fire each of the transmitters sequentially. So they start firing transmitter 1, then 2, 3, and then another cycle again. So if we take a look at the box, it's just basically, this is what we are actually recording in the lower part compared to this firing cycle of the transmitters. So it's just to show you that what kind of data we have here. And now we come back to this this setup of the CNNs. How do we translate this data? How do we create the input of the CNN for this other kind of for the electromagnetic data? So we tried a bunch of different combinations. We ran many iterations on how to create this input, and we ended up settling for something that looks like this. So basically, the main objective of the CNN is you have to put your input has to have the width and height and depth of your input you have to put there the dimensions where you expect to have some kind of correlation. So in this case, we're just simply setting nx, which is just the number of position in a fixed spatial window in the along track dimension. We have nrx, is just the number of the receiver cube, and since each of the receiver cubes is just basically set up in the cross track dimension, this is like a proxy for this cross track dimension. And we also have the time channels, and it's just 27 time channels for the UltraTEMA system. And what we had before for the RGB channels here, we will simply add different transmitters and the 3 different components of each of the receivers. So it's just this channel dimension is just basically where you expect to have some more independent information in each of the channels. So just like the RGB channels from an image. So yeah, so we have now we have a three-dimensional inputs, and we have several channels for these three-dimensional inputs. And I won't spend too much time on the details on the architecture, but now we're performing convolutional 3D convolutions at the beginning. And at some point in the architecture, we simply restructure and start performing 2D convolutions only. And this is just because we want to preserve the dimensions of our input, the spatial dimensions of our input. So NX and NRX, you notice here our output still has these kind of dimensions, which are very similar to what we had before for the kind of image segmentation approach. And this simply allowed us to get a more higher resolution classification map at the end. And yeah, but now the question is, how do we create this? So for the horse, it's kind of straightforward. How do we segment the image? But now we have to create this, what we call label masks. And yeah, I'll show you how that.
Is that number of classes 8 just arbitrary?
Yeah.
10 or 12 or 6?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have to define the number of different kinds of objects that we expect to have on the field. So it's kind of a prior information, the number of objects that you expect. Yeah. So how we define these label masks? We came up with a relatively straightforward approach. We simply take the data of a certain time channel, and we compute the magnitude for each of the, we arrange the data, as I told you before, putting the receiver number on this side and the along track position on this side. And we simply compute the magnitude related to each of the receivers, and then do that for each of the transmitters, and then simply add them up, and we end up with something that looks like this. And we simply define a threshold, and everything that's above that threshold will be given a label of this object. In this case, each color here will be referring to a different kind of object. In this case, it's what we call a clutter object, which is basically a metallic object that is not a UXO. And this is what the neural network has to see, but we have information about each of the positions of the receivers. So we can simply, to get a more accurate positioning of the output of the classification map, we can simply send back to the footprint of the system, and we'll end up with something that looks like this. So yeah, now I will start. I will talk a little bit in detail about this probability layer. So this looks something like this. So it will have the number of channels that we'll have is associated with the number of classes that we want to classify. So for example, we have background, and here we have 5 different sizes of the UXO and 2 clutter objects. And for example, this color here is just saying you that it's most likely that these data points are associated with the background. And here, this darker color for the clutter is just basically saying, okay, this is more likely to be clutter. And if we simply perform a point-wise classification according to the max probability in this layer, we'll end up with this that I showed you before. So this is interesting because we will be able to use this probability layer in further down our, like in a post-processing step that we'll explain later on. So yeah, the acquisition followed by the system, of course, is line by line. So the system goes on one side and it returns, and we have several acquisition lines and somewhat overlapping with each other. And so this is for one acquisition line. And the way we apply our neural network is using a sliding window. So just basically taking pieces of this the data set, the acquired data, and we apply the neural network to each of these windows. So for example, the sliding window will be all the points here in red, and this will be the input of the CNN. And this is our the output of the CNN. So the sorry, I forgot to mention that we this point is just referring to we expect to have a UXO here. So of course, when the system is far away from the UXO, we get that the neural network output is labeling everything as background. So this is the blue shown here. But then if we start to apply the neural network to each of these positions, we'll end up with something that looks like this. So once it gets closer to the UXO object, it starts labeling with a different color that this color in this case is associated with a particular type of UXO. And if we apply all this sliding window to the complete acquisition line, we'll end up getting something that looks like this. In the case we had 3 objects. So notice again, different colors for a different kind of object. So this workflow worked pretty well with synthetic data, but then we started to notice that when we applied to the field data, we had some issues. So a lot of the background was getting picked up as a false detection of UXO or clutter. So we came up with this 2-step workflow in order to tackle this. And just basically, we use the same architecture, the same CNN, but in the first step, we only perform a binary classifier, which is basically only telling us to distinguish between background and metallic objects. And once we get that output, we can actually use it to, from the same field data, we can try to estimate some kind of more realistic noise that will be added to our training data set for the CNN. And so, yeah, the main objective here for the 2-step workflow is simply that to add more realistic noise to the multi-class training data set of the neural network. So I will show you how that looks like. So basically, the output of this first step is what we call a detection map. So it's just basically telling the difference between background in blue and metallic object in orange. And the output of the second step is a classification map. So now each of these blobs has a color, and this color is associated with a different UXO. So I'll talk a little bit more in detail on how we do that. But first, I will simply in this slide, I'm just showing how we generate the training data set. We're using a dipole forward model, the one that I showed you at the first slide, and we simply consider 8 different classes. So the question that you asked about which number of classes just basically depends on how many objects you expect to find on the field. But this is usually available to the contractor when they want to make some kind of clearance for the UXO.
And you find that one clutter class seems to capture all the
That's a good question. I originally we were designing clutter manually, but then we used some physics-based parameterization to try to. The next slide will actually go into detail of that. That's a good. So basically, just a quick reminder here is just since we don't have this, we don't have a field data, a very large number of field data in order to train our neural network with that field data, we have to generate synthetic data. And in this case, for training the first step, we're using 20,000 simulations of this, using this dipole forward model. And for the multi-class, we're using 400,000 samples. So it's a lot of samples, but this forward model is relatively fast, so that wasn't really much of an issue. The validation is just simply to see that to tune some of the parameters while we're doing the training of the neural network. And then we generate this synthetic training data set by simply randomly assigning the target class, so any of these 8 classes. Then the location of the object is just basically below the footprint of the system. We kind of consider this box and just simply randomly place the UXO within that box. And we also change the orientation of the UXO, so it can be horizontal, vertical, or any other orientation. And then the noise level is dependent on, for the second multi-class classification, is taking direct estimated from the field data. Yeah, So going back to the clutter, this is a very important step, because as you said, if we don't come up with a clutter object that is able to account to all the variability that we expect, all the metallic objects that are not a UXO, basically, it's kind of difficult to design manually. But then we use this parameterization, where each of the polarizability curves has 3 parameters, so K, beta, and gamma. And this was proposed a few years back in the UXO literature. And since we have 3 different, 1 L for each of the 3 different axes, we end up with 9 parameters in total. So the way we did it is just basically, we estimate these parameters for the UXOs, which is the plot that I'm showing here. Just basically, it's a simplified version, of course, because we have only 2 parameters here. In reality, it will be like a 9-dimensional space. So we estimate the values for each of these UXO objects, and these are all the values that we estimate here. And then we simply define a distance threshold, which is the one shown here, and fill the rest of the parameter space with random samples, basically. And this is basically will generate decay curves associated with metallic objects that are not similar to the UXOs, basically. So, okay. Yeah, we went ahead and tried our full workflow with data that was acquired in a test site in Sequim Bay in 2022. So this is just the data, and these are the ground truth labels. So basically the objects that were seeded there. And in this case, to get this full acquisition, 7 acquisition lines were used to get this full data. And the current workflow of our neural network requires that we remove the seawater response first. So this is with this water response already removed.
So how deep were these objects?
These are laying on top of the on the sea bottom. These are usually not buried. This is the most usual case that they.
Right, but what's your column of seawater in this environment?
Yeah, the sea column will be like somewhere around 25 meters, but the system is going underwater, and then just very close. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and just one important thing to notice here is that there are some ISO objects, which is basically some kind of standard objects that are used for these test sites. They're just basically pipes with different size, but they're also axially symmetric and roughly about the same size of the UXOs. So this was like a nice test, and we only use UXO objects to train the CNN. So this was like a nice test to see if even if the object is not exactly a UXO, we will be also able to label with the closest object that was available in the training dataset. So this is the output of the first step of our workflow. So this is the anomaly detection. So we can see that we detect all the objects in the background. And then this is the step of estimating the spatially correlated noise that I was just telling you about. So all these cells were manually picked. So this is something that we haven't designed like a fully automatic workflow, but this is also done in the conventional approach. You also have to pick these windows. Basically, after picking these windows, we simply take the rest of the data that was outside these windows, and this is the data that we'll use to estimate this correlated noise. And this correlated noise is simply added here in our second step of the workflow. So all this is just simply to generate this new synthetic noise. And we noticed if we didn't do this, neural networks were getting a lot of the classes were getting wrongly classified, basically, and so it just means that the neural network really has to see what you have on the field. So if it sees something different, that has this other kind of noise, it performs not as good as this. So once the neural network is trained with this synthetic, with this correlated noise added, we get the classification map output that looks like this. So basically, darker colors are where it's more likely to find this particular object. So in case the background is evident, that these darker colors are just getting the background. And then each of these probability maps is just basically darker colors is where you expect, most likely expect to have that particular object. So for example, here, 105 millimeters is very likely to find these dark blobs here. And if we simply take the max probability of each of these objects and assign a color to it, we end up with the classification map. So you can see that some of the objects have this label mixing. So some of might be classified as different objects in each of these data points. So we came up with further post-processing to actually, because the output, what the contractors want in the end is just basically what they call a dig list. And they just want to label where they want to dig out that particular object. And they obviously just want a single label per detected anomaly. So to process our classification map, in order to get the dig list, we came up with this. So for example, if we take this cell, this number 8, and we simply take the data points corresponding to all the data points that were not labeled as background, and we compute the average probabilities to it related to each of these different objects. Here we're using the output of the probability layer that I told you before. So that's something nice about the CNN. And we simply assign as a final label, a single label, we'll use the one that has the highest average probability. So for example, here, the 81 millimeter receives a probability of 70%. So we simply assign that label. The nice thing about here is that you can also define what we call like safety rules. So using this probability output, we can say, for example, if the probability of any of the UXOs that were not clutter or background is higher than 25%, and that particular object was labeled as clutter, since it's much worse to actually label a UXO as clutter than to label clutter as a UXO. So we kind of perform this weighting in order to flip that label and just to be more safe. Okay, so this is the final output, and this is the ground truth and the predicted labels after performing this last step. So a couple of things to notice here is that we actually got the clutter. We were able to discriminate the clutter objects right, some of the clutter objects. So the scuba tank is obviously not a UXO, and it was correctly labeled as clutter. There was some object used to anchor this line at the end that was also labeled as cluttered. We did not miss any UXO, so we correctly, even the smallest ones, the 60 millimeter and the 40 millimeter objects were correctly labeled. And we also, what we expected, that these ISO objects were actually labeled to the closest object available during training. So medium ISO was labeled as 81 millimeter, a large ISO was a bit larger and was labeled as 105 millimeter. So they also have, yeah.
You just take the center of the rectangle as your like final location, or?
Oh yeah, we actually take this, like all the pixels here, like the center of mass from this object of this data points that were not labeled as background. But there's some room for improvement there, and we had some suggestions that maybe a weighting average using the probability values might do a little bit better. Yeah, and we also have available some other field data. This is called the blind width. The calibration line is usually given to the contractor, and they know the labels, and then they have to perform this second test with a blind width where they don't know the actual labels, and they're scored on their results. So this is basically another data set, and we perform the same workflow. This is a classification map, and we get this final output, the predicted labels. I don't have the ground truth here. They just recently shared them with me, and I was not able to put them here. But basically, we simply, for this first try, we missed only one UXO. So this one here, we labeled as clutter, but actually was a UXO. And also 11 out of the 16 clutter objects were labeled correctly as clutter. So we discriminated more than 70% of the clutter. So it was okay. But in order to, of course, this mistake is very, very serious. So we wanted to see if our safety rules were able to actually fix that. And we used the safety rule, basically the one that I showed you before, that if the probability is high of being any UXO is higher than 25%, we simply change the label to that particular UXO object. And by doing that, we are able to label this object, and in terms of the clutter discriminated, we simply reduce the number of discriminated clutter by 1. So basically, only one of the clutter objects kind of switched to UXO with the application of this safety rule. So that was, I think that was a nice result to see that how can we use this probability layer output in a practical way. So yeah, just some concluding remarks. We, in terms of the neural network, the image segmentation really did help. The architecture that we had before was giving an output that was a little bit sparse, so we have to perform a lot of interpolation. And with this image segmentation, we were able to get these higher resolution classification maps. The clutter design using this new physics-based parameterization is much more exhaustive. Before, we were just designing like manually, like disk-like objects, like very long rods, sphere-like objects. So trying to put as much as possible, but we weren't certain that that was picking everything up. So this this new clutter design seemed to have fixed that issue. Adding realistic noise signature is very important, particularly if you're going to apply to field data. It's just that part really improved our classification results. Some of the limitations is that the CNA is relatively sensitive to the background, to the seawater sediment response removal. So we tried 2 different methods for the seawater response removal, and we were kind of getting a little bit different result for some of the objects in terms of the label that they were assigned. Fortunately, we didn't get like any UXO labeled as clutter. It was more like some less discrimination of clutter depending on the background response removal. And some of the type of UXO label were also changing, but not the UXO versus not UXO thing. And there's this, all the objects that we use to generate synthetic data should be close to the objects on the field. And this is just basically some kind of, we have to have this prior information of the objects that we expect to find on the field, because these ordnance libraries of the UXOs are very large. They have like I don't know, hundreds of objects there. So if you try to use all of them, you will get like a poor classification performance. But this is something that is already available to the extractors, and for the conventional approach, they also they don't compare to the full set of objects when doing the library matching. They can put a subset of polarizability curves. And some future work, we will try training with seawater sediments response included, so without having to pre-process our data, just to see if the neural network is still able to do this. But we will require probably more a larger training data set in order to account for this. And finally, and I think this is something that I haven't mentioned so far, and it's important, we're considering only the case that within one of these spatial windows, we have only one object. So they're kind of relatively separated. And yeah, Whereas for the conventional approach, they already developed some kind of way to actually process these cases. So this is a disadvantage. We have some ideas on how to tackle that, but they're still on our to-do list. Yeah, that's all I have prepared. Thanks.
Thank you. We have ample time for questions. Anyone online, you can unmute themselves, or yeah, people in person. Questions for Jorge.
The number associated with the group is the diameter of the UXO, is that correct?
Yes, yes.
And those are like standard sizes for shells or something.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And that's the projectile, not the whole brass case, because they've been fired out into the ocean, yeah?
Yeah, I think they use objects that look like this. So
Yeah, so it's a projectile,
Yeah.
makes sense.
It looks like they were like out and not just scattered. Looked like very organized.
yeah, the
on
first
the seafloor.
yeah the first one, it was
Yeah,
like this.
especially that one.
The calibration line is just basically given to the contractor so that the contractors can see how good they're doing with the system, and this is for test sites. And the blind view is more like random. It's just there.
Are they live munitions?
No, this is
They're blue,
Oh, I don't
training rounds are blue, so they
Okay.
don't scare the crap out of someone that comes across.
I wouldn't know. It looks dangerous to me if it's blue.
Well, exactly, right?
Yeah. In a practical matter, how often are you gonna get a munition that's kind of been unexploded on the ground or on the seafloor that's still kind of in this pristine axial symmetric shape?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think some people have actually studied how much the corrosion of these shells impact their polarizabilities.
I wasn't thinking corrosion, I was thinking like just the impact. Like if they're still hitting something but not
Okay.
exploding.
That's a good point. I haven't thought about it. But if usually I would think that if it like changed its shape a lot, usually it's because it already exploded, or it might be more likely to explode if it has like this.
Could this procedure be extended to mines?
Yes, as long as they're metallic mines, yeah, I think you can actually
And using, there's a lot of work on drone-based EM.
Yes.
Looking for mines now, big time.
Yeah.
And so if that could be used to differentiate a mine from just another piece of metal.
yeah, no, it's definitely an application area. And I've seen some of the work developing drones. They usually have, of course, they have less
Fewer transmitters.
yeah, fewer
One
transmitters
transmitter, one
and
receiver.
fewer
Yeah.
receivers, but yeah, I think I've seen the one I saw in the conference was like three transmitters and 5 receivers or something like that.
Yeah, can you get 12 receivers on a drone?
Well, you
Yeah.
probably wouldn't need it,
Not yet.
because mines are always planted right side up, sort of standard depth.
Yeah, you
In
need
that sense,
you need a
you could
spatial
forget.
resolution too.
Well, I was wondering, like, when they're differentiating 40mm rounds from 60mm rounds, it's not the spatial dimension, it's the amount of conductive material, right? That's giving the different response.
Yeah, actually,
Because you had some really big loops there compared to,
Mines aren't conductive anymore. No,
oh,
well,
they're supposed to have a metal ring in them, but depends on who's making them.
yeah, the dipole model is just basically kind of giving you depending on how the transmitter is coupled with the object. Is basically if you have a very large object and you have your transmitter is coupled with this larger dimension, it will give you different if you have the transmitter like flip back, this way, it will only like illuminate this the polarizability associated with that particular dimension.
It looked like from the picture that the receivers are 3-axis coils about.
Yeah.
About less than a foot.
Yeah.
Long.
Yeah, this is.
What frequency is this? Is there anybody from Black Tusk here? What frequency do they work on? Base frequency? Is it transmitter square wave percent, 100%?
That's a
Or are all these state secrets?
that's a good question. I wouldn't know. Yeah, I don't know that.
So how big is it? Because your detection is quite wide, like you start picking up the anomaly from multiple lines.
Yeah.
Further away. So what's the kind of aspect ratio of like, so your height, you said you're about
Yeah.
a meter above. So what's your footprint? of
Oh
the
yeah, this is
detection?
like 3 meters wide.
No, but like in your diagram, so you're starting detecting even if
Yeah.
you're flying it next to it, right? So how
Yeah.
far on the side can you start sensing the?
Oh, okay.
radius?
That's a good question.
And if you go higher, can you footprint bigger, basically, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't get into details of that. But yeah, basically, since we're dealing with this kind of image segmentation approach, so we also have to train the neural network in order to constrain, like only taking a look, make it only look like at the central part of this anomaly. So basically, if you see the object too much from the side, we're also considering training the neural network to classify that as background. So basically, this box here, the red part is just basically all that will be labeled as UXO. And we also train with objects setting here in these white parts, and they're just basically, yeah. When the UXO is, when the system is, no, when the UXO is here, is basically telling your training data set to label that as background.
So you don't train it to be able to sense it from very far, but it doesn't mean you don't have signal to be able to sense it. You could technically train.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but right now in your training,
Yeah.
what's the furthest away that is it 3 meters? That's the furthest away you.
Yeah, it's yeah, it will be like 3 meters because that's the length of the spatial window. And here on the cross-track dimension will be 1.5 times the width of the system. So it's like, yeah, a little bit more than 3 meters.
Okay. So 1 to 3 roughly.
Yeah.
I'm curious how this all got going. Did Black Tusk approach UBC? They had this problem and I thought UBC could solve it or help solve it, or did you see it presented somewhere and thought, hey, I got a great idea for this sort of data, or just what happened?
I think that's more a question for Lindsay.
We started, this seemed like a good candidate problem to start to explore where can we use neural networks with geophysical data. I mean, you've already got classes, we've got label data, all the things that Jorge mentioned. And so, Black Tusk has had lots of connections with the GIF group. And so we asked for some data just to start to play around with this and made some initial progress. So I came up with just a very sort of simple approach where we basically collapsed that whole window to just a single class. But even with that, we were able to start to see that, like, okay, it looks like we can maybe do something here. And then
They were happy enough to just go along detecting things and finding the anomalies. So this is sort of icing on the cake. This is something extra that they could use.
well, they would typically so Jorge showed kind of the workflow that they follow at first, like detecting anomalies, picking out regions of data, and then they would typically run an inversion. And so basically invert for those dipole parameters. So invert for the polarizabilities and then match that to a library of objects. And so then the question we had is, can we just go direct from data to a label? And it looked like that had some promise with just sort of a super simple neural network and kind of naive approach. But showing that had some promise, and they were interested in applying for a SIGDA project, and so we joined with them to try and really sort of take this further and see what we could do with it.
Cool.
And I guess just the more noise and like if your transmitter is not staying at a perfect height, that just makes that step of isolating that background noise more important.
Yeah,
Like, it'll just, I guess just be a tougher step the noisier the data is.
yeah, like the orientation of your transmitter with respect to the seawater top is what makes us much of this correlated, even though they try to do as much as possible. They still have some issues with this.
And
Yeah,
it seems
okay,
this
can
book is
I-
already suggesting tweaks to the black tusk system to make it even better. And more transmitters, more receivers, different approaches. I'm not sure.
We haven't really
Can I make some comment? Can you hear me?
Limping, yeah, go for it.
Oh, okay, nice, very nice. Hear you. I just, okay, thank you so much for this kind of excellent presentation. Only lifetime only needs the, I think that it's a very kind of very promising applications in CNN. And to add the classification based on the theory. Very promising.
Limping, can you speak up a little bit because we have a hard time hearing you. You speak closer to the mic.
Maybe my microphone not good.
Yeah,
Still not clear.
yeah, and that's better. If you speak louder, it's gonna be better.
Okay, I just comment this. I mean, this is a very promising CNN kind of to add classification for the UXO problems. Of course, there is, right now it's COVID and the media and all the kind of and the test is kind of high quality marine data. Later we have some kind of maybe white noise and sensor height little higher. That's maybe some difficult. I think at this level it's maybe that's not a major concern. So here is maybe I have another question for you. Okay, maybe can you again convert a little bit the generalizability of the kernel string CNN models? If I give you new data set, do you think you can kind of utilise input data to straightforward get to the result, or you need some additional information or needed to tune your CNN models or some maybe even you need some calibration information to do some classification tests for the new data.
So how transferable are the models with the different data set? Can you move it around?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So far we tried with two different. The test from 2021 was with a little bit different height. So I think it was a little bit, well, I think it was around 1 meter. And the test from 2022 was like half a meter roughly. And it seems to be, at least within that range, it seems to be relatively straightforward to implement them for one or the other. And I also run like a quick test with terrestrial data, and there seems it's a bit much more tricky because the signature of the noise is a little bit different. But like a first test, it looked like it also was giving good performance in terms of classification. So I would say it's transferable as long as you can generate your training data set relatively easy. And since the survey is already designed in such a way that you're actually able to detect these objects in the right way, yeah, so good survey design, it also helps a lot for this transferability.
That's great. And the other things you mentioned the test bigness very bigly for the land grid data 2021. You said like you this value you actually you are really pretty bigness. I just ask is that initially you are choosing when you drag this is much later on in kind of earlier stage. When you have big list, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Drag 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until 10 of these. But that's why this one is much later or in some middle big list.
You get the question?
Yeah.
We didn't get you very well, Lin Ping.
Maybe not clear. Okay. And just you go to your slide 2021. There's you said there's one you actually miss
21.
2021. Language data. When you compare the
Ah, yeah.
graph, there's one you actually miss.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll go there.
Yeah. Okay. This exercise is this miss you have to when you look at the dig list. When you look at your dig list, this you have to rank much later or in the earlier stage. Which one?
Yeah.
Which stage?
Yeah. It's very. It's basically the next two objects in the dig list are these two clutter.
Closer to planet.
Yeah, closer to the top of the list, closer to the UXOs.
No, you mean the close to the top or in the like when you look at dig list, okay. Basically, your dig list is a rank the most you actually in the first, right? And now you actually you rank much later. So this means you have to exercise. You remember which the rank number, let's say, roughly, right? Like if you have like the detect, you have like a 40, right? You detect the target at 40 targets. When this means you have to reach the rank number, if you remember roughly, like 30 or 20.
This was the probability value I was getting for this was like 29, like 105 millimeters was getting like 29%, and the clutter was getting like 30 something. So that's why when using this safety rule, since the probability of being UXO was already above 25%, so that's why we simply switch the label to that particular UXO object.
Maybe we can talk about if you use the safety rule like 25%.
Yeah.
If you apply this safety rule, then in this case will be there's increases false alarms. Like you pick something not UXO if you use this safety rule. I mean, when you use this safety rule, you certainly will be dig this UXO appears in this. Meanwhile, when you use this safety rule, you will be there's some false alarm in your place. Is that the case?
Sorry, I didn't.
Okay, that's maybe some, okay. Maybe don't worry. Maybe we can. When we meet, we can chat in the more detail in this case for this January dig list.
I think he was asking.
Don't worry.
Yeah, no, that's
Don't worry. This yeah.
You got the one.
Oh, yeah.
You just need to repeat that.
Okay. Yeah, when I use the safety rule, I also one of the clutter objects was only one of the clutter objects was
Included.
Yeah, included. Exactly.
Okay, that's good. That's great.
Okay, regarding the safety rule,
Yeah.
how did you arrive to that number? And also, do you expect that number to change depending on the number of classes you have?
Yeah, definitely. It will change depending on the number of classes. And I guess yeah, for arriving the particular value is yeah, it's really subjective. I would say it's just a 25% sounded like a good number. And also seeing the values of all the other objects that were labeled as clutter, you can see, well, if I go too low, I will get everything as UXO.
So right now is when you generate this you're still based. Of course, there certainly are some like the spreads and what's kind of the new threshold values you want set like 25% or 30%, this certainly there's kind of an experience. There's only your experience, subjective, right? Is there a possible, I don't know, from this CNN and applications, to do the classification, do some, like an and you have some output features can tell you, oh, this, maybe for this kind of data set, I need to set up a certain rule, maybe. This time, maybe I need 20% school. They will have some kind of features can give you ideas. Not only black box, even from CNN can output something.
More to discuss. Thank you, Nanfeng. I think we'll carry on because we're getting close to the end of the talk.
Yeah, we probably we can. So we can chat more details and maybe DC.
Thanks, Limping.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We had one more question from Peter Walker online. I don't know if you're still around, Peter. No, I don't see you anymore, but there we go. It was about data, like how the data was, what was the data box basically?
Okay.
But I think you've answered it.
Okay.
You can watch the video again. You have one more? One more.
Isn't there a limiting factor on this is your training data set? Because presumably it's a Defense Department has the library of training. So it's only items that they have in their library that you can train with.
Yeah.
So does their library extend beyond what, much beyond this? For example, I mean, sizes and
I think that's a limitation definitely if you're only using the you can also use other more general rules. That's just basically we can use this physics-based parameterization perhaps, and then you start adding objects that have this ratio between L1, then L2 and L3 are basically the same. So we can constrain in terms of these different parameters, perhaps the K, beta, and gamma, and we can probably generate.
But even a visual neural network, like you need 100 penguins pictures of penguins.
Yeah.
So whereas here, it's not typical that you've got many real example,
No, this is only using synthetic data so far.
Okay.
And but we generated like 400,000 synthetic simulations. But we found that the synthetic the noise that you have on the field has to be realistic. So that's why we added these extras. So.
And the training data set from the US has noise. It's like a real measurement. Or is it a synthetic as well? You're saying that they have a huge library of
the ordnance library. It's like
I think it's real, isn't it?
Yeah, it's real.
It's
so
real.
it's in controlled, very controlled.
lab.
A lab.
Gotcha.
Just to clarify, so that if you're going to rely on the physics-based parameterization, what you can do is characterize things as very long and narrow. Maybe not so long and a little thicker. And spherical. Is that kind of thing you're trying to get at if you were to do it using parameters like that?
That would be. That's a way to see it.
Do you rotate them in all dimensions too, like you do?
Yes, it's all rotations.
Now, Francis, if you can do that, you can apply it to mineral exploration.
Well, if you have very long, narrow pipeline.
Oh, there's sheets. There's blobs.
Sure.
Throw a huge airborne EM data set
Give us the length with
and find all the blobs.
ratio and we sure.
Did you actually attend the
I
trials?
think you got another PhD.
No. This assumption of the forward model, the dipole model is assumed for like compact objects. So at some point the forward model, the assumption breaks, I guess. So.
I mean, and that's the distinction between object and geology. You can make useful guesses about object shapes, but geology is a whole different ballgame.
Well, the first simplest pass of a huge airborne EM data set
is a plate.
Is just exactly that. You pick up the things that are long formational versus things that are blocky. And that's the very simplest. So here we got a mathematical way of doing it instantly. and it pulls out the 15 objects in this 200 square kilometer survey that are the most likely blob-shaped bodies. Then go and drill them.
Well, that was a bit.
Well, all you need is a red dot, right?
But I make one comment back to what you said earlier about using this to change the system that they're actually working in. I mean, from a historical perspective, I mean, what really has happened, and a lot of this work started in 2000 or just a bit before with Len Passion and group, and Stephen Billings was at UBC for many years, and so it started with terrestrial work on land with just an EM61, and realizing that you could represent the signal here by a dipole model. Duncan McNeil was actually an early advocate of that, and then it took probably 10 to 12 years before continued development and realizing like, oh, well, we need to work on multiple orientations so that we illuminate the body from many different directions to really get that. And then the systems that are now being developed, and a lot of that's by gap geophysics. And they've really spent a lot of time and effort looking at different scenarios where you've got different objects that are buried, and that you've got enough, you actually get signal around. So that's how they developed that for transmitter system. And then the work on land on the terrestrial part, it's actually taken, it took more than a decade before the DoD would say, okay, we're going to trust the digital geophysics. And prior to that, they were purely mag and flag. So you go over with something, plot a, find something, plot a flag, and then they're going to dig it. But actually digging something up is hugely problematic. You need to have all these DoD techs around, and it's a very tedious, slow operation. So you needed to do something faster. And I think what Black Tusk and other groups have done over the last 10 years is shown that, look, digital geophysics with electromagnetics, we can actually discriminate and classify a lot of the objects. So now that is now accepted. The next frontier has been in the water, because now you're in a conductive environment, and that really complicates things. So the complications were the multi-object, which they think they got a reasonable handle on for the terrestrial stuff, and perhaps also for the ocean bottom stuff. So that technology has gone. What I think is so interesting here, and I think is really exciting, is that just the fact that you just use the data themselves. There's enough signature in there that you're actually able to pull out, a classification with just looking at the signal. Because prior to that, that whole aspect of collecting the data, trying to figure out how many dipoles you've got, what the 13 parameters is a very nonlinear parametric problem. Right. That really took a long time. But Black Tusk and others seem to have kind of worked now that they're pretty confident now. But what this does, it gives you an entirely independent way of looking at those same data. And now you've got two ways of going forward. And I think the big advantage here is that you've got information from both of these, and they can liaise together and make the whole thing perhaps much faster and more stable and reliable. So I think the work that Jorge has done, and Lindsay preceding that on doing that, is really great. And it's actually amazing that you can just look at all these curves and get that information out.
Yeah, I wouldn't have betted on that. But there's definitely a yin and yang between instrument design and survey design and the processing. And when you can do it, then you can design. And when you can design, you can do it. And that fixed 4 transmitter, 12 receiver system, having that stability for all those lines is presumably pretty important. I mean, you couldn't do this with the same number of sample points by hand, because you'd just be all over the place and you wouldn't get precision. But yeah, yin and yang, I'm sure as we get to do better, we're gonna design the surveys to make use of it.
Doug, you're alluding to a possible feedback between the two methods. Are they taking feeding results from this into an inversion and vice versa, or?
Yeah, I think so. There's not a lot that's been done in this, but you got two independent ways of working with this. And now with Jorge, you know, you've got a location, you know, you've got an area of something. You could easily think about doing a parametric inversion to get something else, and then you could do, you know, with the parametric inversion, you could do a library fingerprinting and see how that works. I mean, there's there's a lot of opportunities here.
Yeah, I mean, you could just simply, you have the classification, so a simple step was just before model the shape of that object and you know, if you have, as you showed in one of those rectangles where you have 3 different objects within that, you could forward model the 3 different shapes of those 3 different projectiles, just to see how those look.
I think in the real world, you'd be pretty brave to use that 0.25
Yeah.
But I mean, at this point, that's just.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that can be explored. I mean, now you've got the probabilities, and then maybe fine tuning that to, you know, something that, you know, is safer, and, you know, that you optimize your dig list. That's kind of another like add-on thing. But I think the real work that you've done to get to that point is what makes this really great. Got a map of probabilities, and now you do something with them.
Just as a practical matter in the field, you said you had 1 meter above the ground, you would get your fish there, and I think you said later on you tried it at 0.5 meter.
Yeah.
How the hell do you fly that over an undulating surface at 1 meter, or even more challenging, 0.5 meter, without, you know, keeping it horizontal and not stuffing it into the mud? He wasn't there. Well, okay, but I guess that would back to you, like, that looked like pretty ungainly. Never mind currents and all the rest. How the hell?
I mean, that's, yeah, we work more with the data. But I mean, they really have worked on tuning these systems, and it's pretty incredible what they can do at this point. I mean, I'm sure if you really had crazy bathymetry, you're not going to be 0.5 meter, but they've really done a lot of work to be able to fly these with
So they have the fish itself has some way of orienting itself and maintaining clearance. Or I mean, you could put like little wheels on 1 meter struts, but if you're looking for UXO.
This is a test site.
Well, no, but
it's gonna be flat.
Well, but still,
By definition.
to fly anything underwater, not have it go face first into the mud.
Yeah.
Try size some or something.
At 25 meters too, that's.
Well, 25, you said 1 meter.
No, the water depth. of 25.
Oh, yeah.
25 meters, so have a 1 meter.
There's some great reports that Black Tusk has done through CERDIP that actually really describe the instrumentation. And so
Yeah, no,
it's
I'm just
really-
really curious,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
that's always the challenge in the water, right?
You hit a bombing and.
Well, there's that too. Right? I was wondering about the 1 meter and 1/2 meter, but found it.
You know, you.
All right, thank you one more time. See you next month for next talk.
Thanks, Tom.
The AGM first, right?
Yeah.
So for those that are interested, the groups go to, let's say, change their line of it.